This story is very meaningful. Everyone should hear it. Listen to Brian tell the story. My wedding day was supposed to be perfect, the culmination of a decade-long love story with Tom, the boy who stole my heart in high school. But instead of walking down the aisle with joy, I found myself staring into a storm I never saw coming. It was March 14th, 2025, and the night before, my mother, Linda, had stormed into my hotel room with her new husband, James, demanding he take my father's place in leading me to the altar. Her voice trembled with entitlement, her eyes wild with something I couldn't name, desperation maybe, or delusion. James stood behind her, all smirks and swagger, like he owned the place. I'd barely processed her words when she threatened to skip the wedding if I didn't agree. My heart pounded, a mix of fury and disbelief as I kicked them out of my room, the door slamming shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I collapsed onto the bed, tears stinging my eyes, wondering how the woman who gave birth to me could unravel my dreams so callously. My name is Emily, 24 years old, a girl who's always tried to stitch her broken family together with love and patience. I've got my father's quiet strength and my mother's stubborn streak, a combination that's kept me afloat through years of their bitter divorce and endless squabbles. Tom, my fiancé, now my husband, is my rock, with his warm brown eyes and steady hands that have held me since we were 14. We'd saved every penny for this wedding, planning every detail to make it ours. But family has a way of clawing through even the best laid plans. And that night, as I lay in the dark, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. My mother's chaos, my father's reliability, and the life I was about to start with Tom. The morning of the wedding dawned crisp and bright, the kind of day that promises hope. I stood in the bridal suite, my white dress hugging my frame, the lace cool against my skin. I'd decided both my parents would walk me down the aisle, Dad on my left, Mom on my right. It felt right, a way to honor them both despite their fractured past. But when I looked out at the church, Mom's seat was empty. My stomach twisted, a sharp pang of hurt slicing through the nervous excitement I'd been clinging to. Sarah, my best friend and maid of honor, squeezed my hand, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "She didn't show," Sarah whispered, her voice tight. "I can't believe she'd ditch you over this." I forced a smile, though it wobbled. Maybe it's better this way. I just want today to be about Tom and me. Dad stepped up beside me, his gray suit crisp, his face lined with pride and a hint of worry. "You ready, kiddo?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Yeah, Dad, let's do this." Susan, my stepmom, joined us, her gentle smile a balm to my frayed nerves. She'd been in my life for 4 years, a quiet presence who never tried to replace Mom, but earned her place all the same. The three of us walked down the aisle, the organ music swelling around us. I saw Tom waiting at the altar, his grin wide and boyish, and for a moment, everything else melted away. The guests clapped, though I caught a few curious glances at Mom's absence. I didn't care. This was my day. The ceremony was a blur of vows and tears, happy ones for once. Tom's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto my finger, the cool metal sliding against my skin, and I laughed through my own nerves as I mirrored the gesture, my fingers trembling but sure. His brown eyes locked onto mine, brimming with a quiet joy that made my chest ache in the best way. We kissed, his lips soft and familiar, and for that fleeting moment, the world felt right. Perfectly, beautifully right. The organ's final notes faded, and the small crowd erupted in applause, their cheers wrapping around us like a warm blanket. I clung to that feeling, desperate to hold it close, because deep down, I knew peace like this never lasted long in my family. At the reception, the ballroom glowed with golden light, chandeliers casting a soft shimmer over the tables draped in white linen. I sipped champagne, the bubbles tickling my throat, and swayed with Tom on the dance floor, his hands steady on my waist. Sarah spun past us with one of Tom's groomsmen, her laughter cutting through the music, and I let myself relax into the rhythm of the night. My dad caught my eye from across the room, raising his glass with a proud smile, Susan beside him chatting with a cousin. It was everything I'd dreamed of, until it wasn't. The double doors at the far end of the room swung open with a dramatic thud, and there she was, Mom, storming in like a hurricane, James trailing behind her. Her face was flushed, cheeks streaked with mascara, her eyes darting like a cornered animal's. My heart sank, a cold dread creeping up my spine, snaking its way into my lungs until I could barely breathe. "Emily," she called, her voice sharp and unsteady, cutting through the hum of conversation. Heads turned, the music faltering as the DJ lowered the volume. Tom's grip on my hand tightened, his brow furrowing as he stepped closer to me. "What's she doing?" he muttered, his voice low, laced with unease. "I don't know," I whispered back, my stomach churning. I took a step toward her, my heels clicking against the polished floor, every eye in the room boring into me. "Mom, what's going on?" She stopped a few feet away, wringing her hands, her red dress clinging to her frame like she'd dressed for a gala. Not my wedding. James hovered behind her, his dark jacket unbuttoned, his posture too casual for the tension crackling in the air. "I'm sorry about last night," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I was upset. I overreacted. But I need to talk to you, alone." I glanced at Tom, his jaw tight, then at Sarah, who'd edged closer, her arms crossed and her lips pursed in disapproval. "Whatever it is, just say it," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "This is my wedding, Mom. No more games." Her eyes flickered to James, then back to me, and she took a shaky breath. "I need you to redo the ceremony, right now, so James and I can be part of it." The words hit me like a punch, knocking the air from my lungs. A murmur rippled through the guests, shock, confusion, a few stifled laughs. I blinked, my champagne glass trembling in my hand. "You're not serious," I said, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You skipped the wedding because I wouldn't let him walk me down the aisle, and now you want me to start over?" "It's for your grandmother," she pleaded, stepping closer, her perfume sharp and overwhelming. "She can't know I wasn't there. She'll cut me off, Emily, financially, emotionally, everything. The venue's still set up, most of the guests are here, it's not too late." James moved forward, his voice smooth and oily, like he was selling me something. "Come on, Em. It's a quick fix. 15 minutes, and we all look like one big happy family. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My head spun, anger surging hot and fast. I set my glass down on a nearby table, the clink loud in the sudden quiet. "Harder than it needs to be?" I snapped, my hands balling into fists. "You made it hard when you threw a tantrum last night and walked out on me. This is my day, not yours." Mom's face crumpled, tears spilling over, and she reached for me, but I stepped back, bumping into Tom. "Please, Emily," she sobbed. "I'm begging you, I can't lose her too." Before I could respond, Rachel, our wedding planner, pushed through the crowd, her clipboard clutched like a shield. Her dark eyes flicked between me and Mom, her usual calm demeanor fraying at the edges. "Emily, I hate to interrupt, but there's a situation," she said, her voice tight. "Some guy outside says he's your cousin. He's insistent, says it's urgent." "Cousin?" I frowned, my mind racing. "I don't have a cousin." Mom's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth, and James's eyes narrowed, a flash of something dark crossing his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition. Rachel didn't wait for my answer, gesturing toward the doors. "He's right out there. I can bring him in if you want." "Do it," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. Mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging in, her voice a frantic whisper. "Emily, don't. You don't need this right now." I shook her off, my pulse pounding in my ears. "No, Mom, I need to know what's happening." Rachel disappeared, and the room buzzed with whispers. Sarah sidled up to me, her voice low and fierce. "This is insane. Who's this guy? And why's your mom freaking out?" "I have no idea," I muttered, my eyes locked on the doors. Tom's hand found mine, his thumb brushing my knuckles, a silent anchor in the storm. Seconds later, Rachel returned, a man in tow. He was tall, maybe 30, with sharp blue eyes and a leather jacket that clashed with the formal wear around us. His jaw was set, his stride purposeful as he made a beeline for me. Mom gasped, a choked sound, and James took a step back, his casual facade cracking. "I'm Ethan," he said, stopping in front of me, his voice low and rough. "Your mom's my aunt. I'm here because of him." He jerked his thumb at James, who bristled, his fists clenching. "What the hell are you talking about?" James snarled, his tone venomous. "Who is this guy, Linda?" Mom shook her head, her eyes wide with panic. "He's lying, Emily. Don't listen to him." But Ethan ignored them, his gaze steady on mine. "I knew James before he slithered into your mom's life. He's a con man, marries women, drains their accounts, then vanishes. He's been pulling strings, isolating her, pushing her to cut everyone off. I tracked him here because I couldn't let him destroy what's left of this family." My knees buckled, the room tilting as his words sank in. I looked at Mom, her face a mask of terror, then at James, whose smirk was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating glare. "Is this true?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Mom, tell me he's lying." She opened her mouth, but no words came out, just a strangled sob. James lunged at Ethan, grabbing his collar. "You're full of shit!" he roared, and they stumbled backward, crashing into a table. Glassware shattered, champagne splashing across the floor, and guests shrieked, scrambling out of the way. "Stop it!" I screamed, my throat raw. Tom and Sarah rushed forward, Tom yanking James off while Sarah pulled me back, her arms strong around me. Ethan straightened, wiping blood from his lip, his chest heaving. In the chaos, I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. I'd had enough. Of Mom's delusions, James's manipulations, all of it. I hit FaceTime and called Grandma Margaret, my rock, the one person who'd always seen through the bullshit. Her face appeared, sharp and weathered, her gray eyes narrowing as I poured out the whole mess. Mom's demand, Ethan's revelation, the fight unfolding in front of me. "Let me see her," Grandma barked, her voice cutting through the noise. I turned the phone and Mom froze, her tears stopping mid-flow. "Linda, you skipped your daughter's wedding for that snake?" Grandma's voice was thunder, shaking with fury. "I raised you better than this. Don't come home for the holidays. Don't call me until Emily forgives you, and even then, I might not." The call cut off, leaving a ringing silence. James glared at me, his face twisted with rage, then stormed out, shoving past guests. Mom stood there dazed, her shoulders slumping as if the fight had drained out of her. She didn't follow him this time. Ethan caught my eye, his expression softening. "Sorry for crashing your day," he said, his voice rough. "You deserve the truth." I nodded, numb, my dress heavy around me as I sank into a chair. Tom knelt beside me, his hand warm on my knee. "You okay, Em?" "No," I whispered, tears spilling over, hot and messy. "But I will be." The reception stumbled on, guests whispering, some slipping out early. Sarah stayed close, cracking dark jokes to lighten the mood, while Rachel scrambled to salvage the night, directing staff to clean up the mess. Dad and Susan found me later, Dad pulling me into a hug that smelled of aftershave and safety. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice thick. "You stood your ground." "Thanks, Dad," I murmured, clinging to him, wishing I could rewind to the moment Tom and I said "I do," and freeze it there. The next morning, as Tom and I packed for Paris, my phone buzzed with texts from Mom. "This is your fault," she wrote, her words jagged with blame. "You didn't have to tell Grandma. You're ganging up on me, Emily. I didn't think you'd be this cruel." I stared at the screen, guilt twisting in my gut like a knife. Had I gone too far? Should I have kept it between us? Sarah, sprawled on our couch with a coffee, snorted when I showed her. "She's projecting, Em. Don't let her guilt trip you. She made her bed." "Yeah," Tom agreed, zipping his suitcase. "She chose James over you. You don't owe her a cover-up." I nodded, but the doubt lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. I blocked her number, her socials, everything, needing a clean break for Paris. But she found my work email, a message slipping through just before we boarded. Tom and I read it together, the plane's hum a distant drone. "Emily," it began, "I love you. I'm sorry. James pushed me to make him part of your wedding. It wasn't my idea. He's controlling and I let him twist me. We're working on it, and I see now how I hurt you. Enjoy Paris. Let's talk when you're back." I leaned into Tom, my throat tight. "She's apologizing," I said, "but it feels like she's still defending him." He frowned, his arm sliding around me. "You don't have to figure it out now. We've got a week in Paris. Just us." I nodded, emailing Dad and Claire, Mom's oldest friend, to keep tabs on her. Then I shut my laptop, letting the promise of croissants and cobblestone streets pull me away. 4 months later, back in Chicago, Claire called. Mom had left James. He'd tried to isolate her completely, even from Claire, but she'd snapped, filing for divorce and crashing at Claire's. When Mom called me, her voice was small, broken in a way I hadn't heard before. "You were right," she said, a sob catching in her throat. "He was awful. Thank you for telling Claire. I was too scared to say it." Relief washed over me, warm and heavy, mingling with a fragile hope. Ethan showed up a week later, his leather jacket swapped for a sweater, a peace offering of coffee in hand. "I'm sticking around," he said, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Family's messy, but it's ours." One night, as Mom, Ethan, Tom, and I sat in my living room, Grandma FaceTimed in, her eyes bright despite the lines on her face. "Well," she said, "looks like we're patching this mess up." I squeezed Mom's hand, her fingers trembling but warm. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady. "We're getting there." But the story didn't end there. A week later, as Tom and I unpacked groceries, my phone buzzed. Rachel, her voice urgent. Emily, I just got a weird call. Some guy claiming to be James's brother. He says he's coming for your mom. Something about money she owes. What do I do? My heart stopped. The bag of apples slipping from my hands, rolling across the hardwood floor with a dull thud that echoed in the sudden silence. Tom froze mid-step, a jar of marinara sauce in his grip, his eyes darting to me as the color drained from my face. Rachel's voice crackled through the phone, sharp and insistent, pulling me back from the edge of panic. Emily, did you hear me? She said, her usual cool efficiency fraying. This guy, he sounded serious, said his name's Nate, claims he's James's brother. He's got this rough voice, kept saying your mom owes him money from some deal James cooked up. He wouldn't tell me more, just demanded to know where she's at. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my knuckles whitening. Nate? I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, cracking under the weight of the name. I've never heard of him. James never mentioned a brother. Tom set the jar down hard on the counter, the clink jarring me. He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, his hand resting on my shoulder, warm and grounding. What's she saying? He asked, his brow creasing with worry. I switched the call to speaker, Rachel's words spilling into the room like shards of glass. He didn't give details, Emily, just kept saying Linda knows what she did and she can't run from this. I told him I'm just the wedding planner, I don't know anything, but he laughed, this creepy low chuckle, and said he'd find her himself. I don't know how he got my number, maybe from the venue records? My stomach twisted, a sick, cold knot forming as I pictured Mom, fragile, newly free from James, crashing at Claire's place, thinking she'd escaped. I sank into a chair, my legs unsteady, the grocery bags forgotten around me. Did he say what he wants? Money? How much? He didn't specify, Rachel said, her voice dropping. But he sounded pissed, like it's personal. Emily, I don't like this. Should I call the cops? I glanced at Tom, his jaw tight, his eyes searching mine for an answer I didn't have. Not yet, I said, forcing the words out despite the tremor in my chest. I need to talk to Mom first. Thanks, Rachel. Keep me posted if he calls again. Be careful, she said, and the line went dead, leaving a ringing silence that pressed against my ears. Tom knelt in front of me, his hands cupping my face, his thumbs brushing away the tears I hadn't realized were falling. Hey, he said softly, we'll figure this out. You're not doing this alone. I nodded, but my mind was racing, a chaotic swirl of fear and anger. James was gone, divorce papers filed, his shadow finally lifting, or so I'd thought. Now this Nate, a new ghost from his past, clawing his way into our lives. I grabbed my phone again, dialing Mom, my fingers fumbling over the screen. It rang once, twice, then voicemail. Mom, it's me, I said, my voice shaking. Call me back, now. Something's up with James's brother, we need to talk. I tried Claire next, her cheerful hello, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Claire, it's Emily. Is Mom with you? She's out grabbing takeout, Claire said, her tone shifting as she caught the edge in my voice. What's wrong? I spilled it all. Rachel's call, Nate's threats, the money. Claire sucked in a breath, her usual calm cracking. Jesus, Emily. I knew James was bad news, but a brother? She never mentioned that. Neither did I said, rubbing my temple, a headache pulsing behind my eyes. Just keep her there when she gets back. Don't let her go anywhere alone. I'm coming over. Tom grabbed his keys before I'd even hung up, his movements quick and decisive. I'll drive, he said, and I didn't argue, grateful for his steady presence as my world tilted again. The drive to Claire's apartment was a blur of red lights and honking horns, Chicago's evening traffic a maddening snarl. I stared out the window, my reflection pale and hollow in the glass, my mind replaying every moment with James, his smirks, his smooth lies, the way he'd twisted Mom into someone I barely recognized. How had we missed this? A brother? A debt? My hands clenched in my lap, nails digging into my palms, the sting a sharp anchor to reality. We pulled up to Claire's building, a modest brick walk-up in a quiet neighborhood. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows as we climbed the stairs. Claire opened the door before I could knock, her round face etched with worry, her graying hair pulled into a messy bun. Mom stood behind her, a takeout bag dangling from her hand, her eyes wide and glassy. Emily? Mom said, her voice small, almost childlike. What's happening? I stepped inside, the smell of soy sauce and fried rice hitting me as I shut the door. Mom, who's Nate? I asked, my tone sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. Her face crumpled, the bag slipping to the floor, spilling containers across the rug. She staggered back, clutching the arm of Claire's worn sofa, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Nate?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "How do you know about Nate?" "He called Rachel," I said, stepping closer, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it. "Said he's James's brother. Said you owe him money, that you know what you did. What the hell is going on?" Mom sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Claire hovered, her hands fluttering like she didn't know where to land, while Tom stood by the door, his arms crossed, watching us with quiet intensity. I knelt in front of Mom, pulling her hands away, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Talk to me," I said, my voice softer now, though it trembled with the effort to stay calm. "No more secrets." She took a ragged breath, her eyes red and raw. "Nate's real," she said finally, the words spilling out like a confession. "James's older brother. They ran scams together, small stuff mostly, cons on lonely women. When James met me, he said he was done with that life, that he wanted something real. But Nate didn't buy it. He thought I was just another mark, and when James pushed for the quick marriage, Nate got mad, said James owed him a cut of whatever he took from me." My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. "So this was all a game? You married a con man, and now his brother's after you?" "I didn't know at first," she cried, her voice rising, desperate. "I thought James loved me. But after the wedding, your wedding, he started asking for money, big amounts. I gave him some, thinking it'd keep him happy, but he must have sent it to Nate to shut him up. When I left him, Nate must have figured the cash flow stopped." I stood, pacing the small living room, my dress shoes scuffing Claire's rug. Anger burned through me, hot and blinding, not just at James, but at Mom, at myself for not seeing it sooner. "How much, Mom?" I demanded. "How much did you give him?" 10,000, she mumbled, barely audible. "From my savings, all I had left." Claire gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth, and Tom swore under his breath. I stopped pacing, my hands shaking as I stared at her. $10,000? And now this Nate guy thinks you've got more? "I don't know what he thinks," she said, her voice breaking again. "I didn't know he'd come after me. James swore he'd handle it." "Handle it?" I snapped, my patience snapping like a twig. "He's gone, Mom. He's not handling anything. You are." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy between us. Claire stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Emily, yelling won't fix this. We need a plan. If this Nate's dangerous—" "He is," a new voice cut in, low and rough. We all turned, startled, as Ethan stepped through the door, his leather jacket dusted with rain, his blue eyes dark with something I couldn't read. "Sorry, Claire let me up. I heard you from the hall." "Ethan?" I said, my heart leaping into my throat. "How do you—" "I know Nate," he said, shutting the door behind him, his boots heavy on the floor. "Ran into him years ago, back when I was digging into James. He's not like his brother. James is slick, Nate's brute force. If he's here, he's not messing around." Mom whimpered, curling into herself, and I felt a pang of pity despite my anger. Tom moved to my side, his hand finding mine, his voice steady. "What does he want, Ethan? Money or something else?" "Money's the start," Ethan said, leaning against the wall, his posture deceptively casual. "But with Nate, it's pride too. James cut him out, and he'll take it out on Linda, or anyone close to her. He's not above roughing people up to make a point." My blood ran cold, a shiver racing down my spine. I looked at Mom, her face pale and drawn, then at Tom, his eyes blazing with protective fire. "We need to call the cops," I said, my voice firm now, decision settling over me like armor. "This isn't just about money anymore. It's about keeping us safe." "Agreed," Claire said, already reaching for her phone. "I've got a friend at the precinct. He'll take this seriously." Ethan nodded, but his expression stayed grim. "Do it. But Nate's slippery. Cops might not catch him fast enough. I'll stick around, keep an eye out." Mom looked up, her eyes pleading. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this." "I know," I said, cutting her off, my voice softer but still edged with steel. "But we're in it now. We'll deal with it. Together." As Claire dialed, Tom pulled me into a hug, his arms strong around me, his breath warm against my hair. "We've got this," he whispered, and I clung to him, praying he was right. The rain hammered against Claire's windows, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pounding in my chest as I stood there, phone still clutched in my hand, Rachel's warning about Nate echoing in my ears. Mom sat crumpled on the couch, her face buried in her hands, her sobs muffled but piercing. Ethan leaned against the wall, his sharp eyes scanning the room like he expected Nate to burst through the door any second. Tom stayed close, his hand firm on my shoulder, his steady breathing the only thing keeping me from spiraling completely. Claire was on the phone with her cop friend, her voice low and urgent, relaying every detail we'd pieced together. Nate, the money, the threat. "They're sending a patrol car," Claire said, hanging up, her face grim but resolute. "They'll check the area, see if this Nate guy's lurking around. But Emily, they need a statement from Linda, something solid to work with." I turned to Mom, my voice cutting through her whimpers. "Mom, you have to tell them everything. James, the money, Nate. No holding back this time." She looked up, her eyes red and swollen, her lips trembling as she nodded. "Okay," she whispered, barely audible. "I'll do it. I just want this to stop." Ethan pushed off the wall, his boots scuffing the floor as he stepped closer. "Good," he said, his tone hard. "Because Nate's not the type to back off easy. I've seen him break a guy's arm over $100 once. He's unhinged, and James leaving him high and dry only made it worse." My stomach churned, a mix of fear and fury boiling inside me. I pictured Nate out there in the rain, a shadow with James's smirk and twice the venom, hunting Mom down for a debt she'd been tricked into. I hated her for being so blind, for dragging us into this mess, but I hated James more. And now Nate, this faceless threat who'd turned my fresh start with Tom into a nightmare. The cops arrived 20 minutes later, 2 officers in dripping raincoats, their radios crackling as they stepped inside. The older one, a stocky guy with a graying mustache named Officer Reynolds, took Mom's statement, scribbling notes as she haltingly recounted James's lies, the 10,000 she'd handed over, and Nate's role in their schemes. Her voice broke when she got to the part about me, how she'd pushed James into my wedding, how she'd let him twist her against her own daughter. "I didn't see it," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought he loved me, but he just used me, and now Nate's picking up where he left off." Reynolds nodded, his face unreadable, but his partner, a younger woman with sharp eyes, glanced at me with something like sympathy. "We'll put out a description," she said. "If he's in the city, we'll find him, but you all need to stay vigilant. Lock your doors. Don't go out alone." "We won't," Tom said, his voice steady, though I felt the tension in his grip as he squeezed my hand. After they left, Claire brewed coffee, the bitter smell filling the small apartment as we sat in uneasy silence. Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through something, contacts maybe, or old messages about Nate. "I've got a buddy who owes me a favor," he said, not looking up. "Used to run with guys like Nate. I'll see if he's heard anything." "Thanks," I said, my voice hoarse. I looked at Mom, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from, her eyes distant. "We're going to be okay," I told her, though I wasn't sure I believed it. She met my gaze, a flicker of gratitude breaking through her despair. "I don't deserve you," she murmured, and for once I didn't argue. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a call from Reynolds. Tom and I were back at our place, unpacking the last of our groceries, trying to reclaim some normalcy. I answered, my heart thudding against my ribs. "We got him," Reynolds said, his gruff voice crackling through the speaker. "Nate Parker. Picked him up last night outside a bar downtown, drunk, waving a knife around, ranting about your mom. He's in custody now, but he's not talking much. Looks like James skipped town, though. No sign of him." Relief flooded me, warm and overwhelming, though it didn't erase the bitter taste in my mouth. "What happens to Nate?" I asked, leaning against the counter, Tom's arm sliding around my waist. "Assault with a deadly weapon for starters," Reynolds said. "Plus whatever we dig up on his record. And trust me, there's plenty. He's looking at years behind bars. Your mom's safe, at least from him." "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling as I hung up. Tom pulled me close, his chin resting on my head, and I let myself cry, tears of exhaustion, of anger, of gratitude that we'd made it through. I called Mom later, Claire answering first, her voice bright with relief. "She's okay," Claire said. "Shaken, but she's here. Ethan's been crashing on my couch, keeping watch. He's a good kid." "He is," I agreed, a small smile tugging at my lips. When Mom got on, her voice was stronger, though still fragile. "Emily, I'm so sorry," she said, and I could hear the weight of it, the regret, the shame. "I let James ruin everything, and now Nate, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." "Just stay safe," I said, my throat tight. "That's enough for now." A week later, Ethan stopped by our apartment, a 6-pack of beer in hand as a peace offering. We sat on the couch, Tom cracking open a can, the tension easing with every sip. "Heard from my buddy," Ethan said, leaning back, his boots propped on the coffee table. James is gone, bolted to Mexico or somewhere, left Nate to rot. Fitting end for a coward. Good riddance, Tom said, raising his can, and I clinked mine against it, a quiet victory in the gesture. But Nate's fate stuck with me. I saw it on the news a few days later. His mugshot, a snarling face with James's eyes, handcuffs glinting as they led him into court. The anchor said he'd resisted arrest, lunged at an officer, earned himself a broken nose and an extra charge. He'd screamed about revenge, about debts unpaid, but the judge didn't flinch. 10 years, no parole, a sentence that felt like justice and punishment rolled into one. I imagined him in a cell, alone, raging against the bars, his pride shattered, his brother's betrayal a wound that wouldn't heal. It was a bitter end, and part of me pitied him, just a flicker, before I let it go. Life crept back to normal, or as close as it could get. Tom and I settled into our routine, cooking dinners, planning trips, laughing over dumb TV shows. Mom moved in with Claire permanently, started therapy, piecing herself back together. Ethan stuck around, a new fixture in our messy family, his dry humor a balm to old scars. Grandma Margaret called one Sunday, her voice crackling through FaceTime, her smile wide. "You're tougher than I ever was," she said, her eyes twinkling. "We're a stubborn bunch, but we survive." "We do," I said, and I meant it. Looking back, I learned something hard but true. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you when the storm hits, and it's knowing when to cut the ones who drag you under. James and Nate taught me that, their greed and lies a harsh lesson in trust. I'd fought for my happiness, for Tom, for the life we'd built, and I'd won. Not a clean victory, but one that left me standing. So here's my question to you. Whoever's listening, when the people you love turn into strangers, do you hold on or let go? What would you have done in my shoes? Drop your thoughts below because I'd love to know. After all, we're all just trying to figure this out, one messy step at a time.